And good morning, and a happy new year. Come and gone. I often remind myself about how the holidays, how quickly they get here, and we try to enjoy it as much as possible, and they go pretty fast, don't they, Dwayne? Yes. But we're glad that you're here. Caleb, if you could check the screen underneath there so I can get my monitor to work, I'd appreciate that. But we appreciate if you're visiting with us, too. And we're glad that you're here, that if afterwards, if you wouldn't mind just briefly staying a moment or two so we could at least introduce ourselves to you and get to know you just a little bit better. We'd like that opportunity as well. This is also since January, the first part of January, the elders have come together with a 2016 budget, and after the sermon, I will briefly go over that. We'll hand out the handout so you can kind of see where we're at with it and kind of give you a little brief description that was presented to the men of the congregation in December, and so this will be our 2016 budget. So it won't take long to go really through there. It's pretty self-explanatory when you go through that. So just briefly, just after we're done, we'll be able to go over some of those. Have you ever been in a conversation where someone was telling you something and you just didn't get it? Been there. It just didn't register for some reason or another. In fact, after putting this together, my whole lesson for here and going forward is trying to present Jesus Christ as the Son of God. And that's what we believe. And there were some that when he walked this earth didn't believe it. And that always got me puzzled, especially of the Jewish nation. For those who thousands of years were to believe of a coming Messiah, even still today. In fact, my study for this evening, and I welcome you back for us to look a little bit further into what a modern day Jew is looking for. Because I had to ask the question. If their Messiah had not come, what are they looking for in this 2016? What were they looking for 2,000 years ago? Not much has changed in their belief, and I was kind of surprised at that. And there wasn't really a big surprise that they did not see it, as glaring as we see all the examples of Jesus Christ, of who he is and who he is today. And that question is going to have to be asked in every one of us. Who is Jesus, and who is Jesus to you? Was he just like what some other religions profess? Was he just a good man, a good teacher, and we just kind of need to subscribe to his way of life, kind of like a diet or an exercise program that this guru has come together with this magical thing that we put together, and we just kind of follow that? Or is he truly the Son of God, come down to this earth? I mean, some can't grasp that. They say, how can a deity even want to do that? I mean, you're God. Why would you want to lower yourself, as the scriptures say, lower than the angels, to humbly walk among mankind? You're God. That's above you. You're supposed to be on a throne. And they didn't understand any. They just didn't get it, and they missed it. Sometimes we can do that. And I hope that we don't miss the most important subject matter of them all, of Jesus Christ in our lives today. Because they didn't piece it all together just right before them. And sometimes that can happen to any of us, that you just missed it. Well, you don't need to feel alone, because there are a couple of occasions like that in the Bible. And there are actually several, but we're just going to observe a couple today. That Jesus spoke of something about himself, and they didn't get it. They missed it. Maybe it was they didn't want to see it deep down, and I think that's really what it boils down to. Maybe they even love the darkness more than the light, as Scripture points out in John 3:19. And they are blinded then by any truths and the truths for their life. And if we're not careful, it may happen to us as well. Miss even Jesus Christ, where some did even in his own time. Because what I want us to know is everything, when we read in the Bible, from start to finish, from Genesis to Revelation, everything points to Jesus. Forward or backwards, depending on where in dispensation that you lived in. Now, we all know Jesus. And even as the world, as I said, some even other religions that deny him to be the Son of God, that he was a great teacher. Great teachers can always use current examples, don't they, with someone or something to help get their point across. I know great coaches do that, and great teachers today do that. They will take a modern day example for us to understand. They don't have to dig back some thousands of years ago for stuff that we can't relate to. They use modern day examples. So did Jesus. Now, he used many parables, a kind of a story that they could all relate to. A lot of it involving, farming and shepherding, stuff that they took, that common knowledge, stuff that we've kind of lost sight of because of our great technology in our modern age. So it could have been a parable, a story they can relate to. But in these examples we use today, Jesus pointed to himself as the thing that they were supposed to be looking for. What we are supposed to be looking for, always should be. But in reality, our focus always pointing back to Jesus Christ. Now, these examples are found in John, chapters 7 and 8, if you want to use that as our reference. We start with a small history lesson, if you're turning there, to get a modern-day Jew's perspective that is found in John 7 in verse 2, where it says, "Now the Jews' feast of booths," it's what it's called, and today they call it the Feast of the Tabernacles, is going on. Jewish life had all kinds of celebrations and remembrances. In fact, a Jewish person's life during this time, there were three really big ones, big feasts. There were Passover, and most of us understand what Passover was. We've heard of that. And then there was Pentecost, another one you may kind of be familiar with. You've heard of Pentecost, you've heard of Passover, but not many of us would raise our hand and say that we've heard of the Feast of Booths and really even understand what that is. The one here, Feast of Booths, that is called here in John's reference, or the Feast of the Tabernacles, which it is now called, anyone within 15 miles of Jerusalem was required to attend the Feast of the Tabernacles. So it's a must celebration. It's if Jerusalem was your home and you lived within a 15-mile radius, you were required, not suggested, not think about, you were required to be in this celebration. It was the most popular, and it was a very joyous occasion, kind of sort of where I emulate what we do, what Christmas does for us. We gather around, our families come in, we gather around a lot of food, and we have celebrations. Well, we can kind of maybe correlate that to us today. We get excited about it. As many young children, we know Christmas is coming. They look forward to it. This is not something that they were agonizing to celebrate. They were wanting to celebrate. This was also an 8-day celebration, very much similar to Hanukkah. It was celebrated in the fall months during October every year. That's the time that you would feast, when you have all your crops and you have all of your abundance to be able to share with others. So during this time, I would say it's a big deal. The temple trumpets would blow each day, and why the disciples wanted Jesus to go and kind of be seen. This is an opportunity for your ministry. There's going to be a lot of people here to put himself kind of on display as many made their pilgrimage. Now, many would stay in tents. Kind of the pictures that I put up here, some made of leafy branches that you've seen in some of the illustrations, while staying in tents. Now, there was a symbol for this. It wasn't like roughing it like we say camping. That's the only thing that we kind of do now, and some of us enjoy that, to camp, to rough it. While in staying in tents, it was supposed to remind them also of the wilderness life their ancestors had taken. So it was kind of a passing down. Even though they didn't have to go through it, they kind of want to be reminded of that, in focus in that past, to make sure that during Moses' time they understood what life was like for them. A regular roughing it out in tents, not so much like camping, but it was also there to remind them that God too, if you remember, lived in a tent during those times, that resided on the mercy seat in the Holy of Holies. As they traveled around this tent, it was taken up when they left and put back up. It was called what? The tabernacle. Okay, now you understand the Feast of the Tabernacle. Okay, now we're getting the coming together of why they understood what this and what the significance was for them. Now, this feast is rich in symbolism for a Jew. It was during this time in chapter 8, after the adulterous woman was brought to Jesus at the court of women, that we'll see in a moment. This for them, this representation, was their trust in God. They did this with a couple of things. First, there was a ceremony of the outpouring of water drawn from Siloam, which symbolized, again, the water given to them by God that came forth from the rock. Okay, so we can understand that they are rich in symbolism, rich in history. They are going back and reminding themselves of how God delivered them from slavery and crossed into the desert. You know, the parting of the Red Sea, all of that. Even though they weren't there to experience it, this was kind of relive it. It's kind of like what we remember the 4th of July, and we think back of our forefathers, and we think about signing the Declaration of Independence. We kind of put ourselves in that mindset. And this spiritual rock was Christ, Paul said in Corinthians. Christ was there all along. And the same water God provided for them in the desert so they would not die, as many of them fear that they would. And to be reminded that one day he would provide living water. Isn't that what he told the woman at the well in John chapter 4? He who drinks from this water, what? Will never thirst again, Jesus said. And we see Jesus first declare this very thing on the last day of the feast when water was on their mind. And Jesus says this statement, I'm the water. He is the water. Remember at this time of the feast where they were remembering water and are supposed to be focusing on that. One day water and God, thankfulness to God. One day he would provide living water. Notice in our text in John 7, starting with verse 37. Now on the last day, the great day of the feast, Jesus stood and cried out, saying, if anyone is thirsty, let him come to me and drink. This breathes new life off the pages of John. Before I just say, well, okay, he's talking about water. What's it? The significance is the crowd that he was talking to, the ones that were supposed to the Jew first and then the Gentile, all of this remembrance of water and this spiritual drink, and all of a sudden this man steps up on the forefront and he says, I am that drink. He says, he who believes in me, as the scripture said, from his innermost being will flow rivers of living water. But this he spoke of the Spirit whom those who believed in him were to receive, for the Spirit was not yet given because Jesus was not yet glorified. He didn't die on the cross yet. Didn't have that separation where the Spirit is within us today. He is proclaiming in this statement a question for them and now us. This water you seek, I am here. You want that living water? I am he. I am that living water. In fact, the next verse says some are convinced. Some are convinced he is the Christ. We're all convinced? No, others not so much. In fact, some of them wanted to arrest him, to put their hands on him, to bring charge against him. If anyone is thirsty, he said, let him come to me. Now, what a thing to say at a time like this. Because as we know in like sports analogy, if you're going to talk the talk, as we saw Clemson and OU, and we said, boy, they backed it up, didn't they? See, when you're going to say something, you better be prepared to defend that, whatever it is that your platform is. But do we see it today? Jesus over and over during this festival will say, I am, and I am he. Ever heard that word used before? Isn't that when Moses asked, who shall I say sent me? The reply to tell them, I am sent me. And here he was giving the invitation that anyone that would come to him and drink would reign with him forever. It says all of this on the last day of the festival about water. But he wouldn't end with the symbolism here, and that's why God is glorified this morning in our songs and our praise, and even as these words come off the page. There was also another observance with a ceremony taking place that we don't understand because we don't have a feast of booths here for us to even understand it. And it happened in the outer courtyard where they bring the adulterous woman to him at the courtyard of women in chapter 8. We're not going to get into that dialogue. It was called that because that was as far as women could go. At this time, like Christmas, is very busy. It's a very noisy place. I want you to kind of bring in those sights and sounds as because the treasury was there as well. And this is where the light ceremony would go on. We don't understand a light ceremony. We go so far removed from what light, when we have lights, when they go on and when they go off. And I know some of us have lost our electricity for a couple of days or maybe even a week, and we really appreciate that. But in this ceremony, there would be grand candelabras set up with wicks. And not just an ordinary wick that we find in a candle, but these were made from the high priest's robes. Okay, so it's not just a candle you go buy at the dollar store. It's a candle with very, very significant meaning. And with these wicks, as you can say, well, high priest's robe is lighting this. So, I mean, there is, again, rich in symbolism. And the temple priests would set up 4 great lampstands with golden lamp holders, the text says, which they would light with the aid of enormous ladders in the temple courtyard. The lighting of these lamps became the celebration of what is called the Great Hosanna. The celebration went on into the wee hours, I guess as celebrations would go, maybe even our New Year's, kind of toasting it, letting it go on and on. It was music, dancing, and rejoicing, while the beautiful lights lit up the night. I would say no wonder they liked it. It's the only thing I can come close of trying to pictures of this light on the hill when it's all lit up like this. Christmas lights for us is what I thought of, what Jerusalem may have looked like at the time. We are told during this time was very breathtaking, illuminated city on a hill. Why so many go and see great displays of lights this time of year. Maybe you made the trek down to Elmer Thomas Park. Maybe you went to Chickasha. We like to go see the lights. We load up so we can see it. It's seen from afar. Ever wonder why deep down we are attracted to light? Now, this is so lit up and such a display. Jesus uses this time with another teaching about himself and to display in our lives. This is referenced to over in Matthew 5, 14, and 16, that a city in a hill that's lit cannot be hidden. Everybody sees it for miles around. You know, the Christmas tree that we have up in our park, a doctor once had in his own yard. It can be seen on the, I live on the far east side coming up on Flower Mound. Down the hill, I can see that red illuminated tree during Christmas time. You can see that from some distance. Chickasha's tree is twice the size because it was the same man that bought it, and he donated that tree to see a little small history lesson for you. When he bought that tree, that went in his yard. The one in Chickasha, which really stands up and goes for a ways off that you can see. So this group knew how Jerusalem would be lit each and every year during this ceremony. Now, here's what I want us to see today as we put ourselves in those people's shoes during this time. The following morning, the Jewish people would recite the prayer of the 8th day of the feast. They would say, "Be thou praised, O Lord our God, King of the universe, who makes light and causes darkness, who makes peace and createth all, the light of the world as the treasure of life." Now, these lights everywhere, including their tents, would be lit up every night except on the final night, the 8th night. The light to them was to be a symbol, again, and remember a God to call his people for guidance as light in a ceremony to drive home the point. How many times do we say that we are to walk in the light? See, we know that of Jesus. They didn't. They still don't. And are not even looking for him to be light. To look to God to light up their path like Jesus does for us. Just like God provided the pillar of fire at night so their ancestors could see. They were not in the darkness. God provided that light. And when the pillar moved, they moved. Got to be under the light. Otherwise, I'm going to trip and fall. I'm not going to have a very successful life if I'm not under this pillar. They got that. They understood light. And if you didn't move, guess what? It would be you that would be stuck out in the darkness. Very, very much with us today. That's easy to understand. But they recited passages such as Psalms 27:1. The Lord is my light and my salvation. Whom shall I fear? In Psalms 43:3, oh, send out your light and your truth. Let them lead me. Let them bring to me to your holy hill and to your dwelling places. They recited that. And we're going to miss the greatest light of all by choice. Of all of what he performed, all of what he proved to be the Son of God, all of these would be read and sung for 7 days straight, that God is light. Now, I've set that up purposely so if we can understand where this is heading, to get the concept. They got it. Psalms 43:3, the Psalms 27:1 we just read. God is light. Then as the ceremony continued on the 8th and the final night, the candles would go out. And you had to wait another year for the lights to shine over Jerusalem. Just like that. Ceremony's over. It's kind of like right now, waiting for the city to turn off the lights. Christmas has come, January. Holidays are over. Time to shut them down, pack them all up, and maybe you're doing that at your house for another year. We understand that with the displays that we use on an annual basis. And on the final night, let's notice that if they never had ever explained like this before, if we've never ever understood this portion, to understand it like they were seeing it at the time of Jesus, because timing is so awesome here, and I don't want you to miss it. He makes the greatest proclamation. A lot of times we were saying, well, God says he's light. Jesus is, he's this living water. He's like, it's when he tells this that really breathes new life into my appreciation of the story. He makes the greatest proclamation found in John chapter 8, starting in verse 12, where many of us know the passage but didn't know the other details that we were given for the rest of the story. Now, I never did as well before studying and looking this up. Then Jesus again spoke to them, saying, I am the light of the world. He who follows me will not walk in darkness, but will have the light of life. Isn't that incredible? In the darkness. I mean, just before that, they were talking about water and our living water and going back to that spiritual rock. If you're thirsty, come to me. I am that water. And then at the darkest situation, he didn't come and profess this while it was lit up like I was coming up on Christmas Eve and trying to get you to distract you from a display. Your mind would be focused on something else. He waited until all the lights went out to declare he is the light of the world. Now, we may have heard that verse hundreds of times before, but have never took notice of the timing and what that would mean for those people and now us if we will respond. Now, that would be a big announcement when he said it. It was dark again. So like water, you're looking for water, here I am. You're looking for light to light up your paths. And just as the pillar of fire moved, you had to move. So God's moving. You're moving in his light. He's not moving into yours. And if you stay in darkness, that is really your choice. This is not just a quote, not a nice saying. He is declaring who he is if they will see. Is Jesus lit up in this dark world, in your world? Did we see when and where he said it used the big occasion to announce this? Because, as I said, until further study, I didn't understand when and where, and this breeds new life and should have in our lives, but sometimes it don't. And it didn't. And sometimes people can miss it because they missed it. How could they have? The Bible just declares it as just unbelief because they didn't want to believe it. And that's what it is. And even though we say, well, what if some person from the dead came back and told me all about life after death and eternity, and that you wouldn't believe him? So why? I wouldn't? Because the Bible says you wouldn't. It says you have Moses and the prophets to believe all of what God has told us for our life and beyond. And if you don't believe them, it wouldn't matter if someone came back from the dead. It wouldn't matter if you say, well, why don't you send down fire from heaven? Why don't you show us another sign? What signs do you need to see when you heal a blind man since birth, a paraplegic, a withered hand, when you can walk on water? All of these things were there and readily available to be testified for or against. We can too sometimes miss it. Many have still today do not believe Jesus as the Son of God. He wasn't just walking along and having these private conversations with his disciples that we can understand what his text said. He made this proclamation to many. And there were followers, and we see them come, and then we see them go, and some sustain. He said to them, he is the light of the world. This should add even more appreciation. And think of all of this after the lights went out. Jesus is walking along the temple, which had been darkened and was so lit up for the past 7 days with celebration and music, and now it's over. It's kind of a dull moment. In the darkness, Jesus chose then to proclaim that he is the light of the world. He waited for just the right moment. Maybe he waits for dark times in our lives. Did you ever see that? People respond when it's the darkest of their lives. Why? Because they need the light. They can see it. They've hit rock bottom. Sometimes it takes that. And we can see that because he is light. He produces that. And he waited for just the right moment, had perfect timing, that he was telling everyone around him that he is the light, not only of the world, which they understood in the Psalm stuff. We're talking about the light of the cosmos. It's not just the sun comes up and the sun goes down. We're talking when it's completely lit up. Galaxies and stars, the universe. Even gets bigger. He was the creator of that light. He also waits to show the contrast between light and dark, which kind of is our lives today. And he waits until he goes back to dark to proclaim he is the light, not during the best time of the light festival. He wants to say that this light never goes out. That's a huge claim. Can he back it up? We know their answer is yes. Still is today. And just as we love and yearn for light, there is something also about the darkness that is a turnoff. The darkness always portrays fear because of obstacles I may not see. I may trip and fall. Ever get hurt doing it? And in contrast, what does light do? It reveals. It lights up my path. Why those recited verses they remembered, they are to see God as our light, to recognize it's not in man to direct his own steps, as the Bible says. So we can see. God wants to light up our path so we don't stumble, and his word does that for us today. We today, just as we often say, are to keep walking in the light, as the writer John points out, that we are encouraged to keep looking and following the light, and that we don't have to walk in darkness. We can choose either. It's not a have to. And the brilliance of it, anyone who comes to him will taste of that water and will be satisfied. And we will have the light to have in front of us. But also we know that God is light. He loves light. He creates light. He sheds light. He desires light. And he has told us that we are light by then declaring, you are the light of the world. Now, I hope that he is the light of your life. But if not, we offer an invitation for that as well, to take upon his light if you never have before, and see that he is living water. And he offers that to every one of us. He is our everything, even the bread of life, where he is told in the crowd in John 6, where some of them did not get that point either. They had eaten and filled their stomachs with the bread he provided them over in John 6, starting in verse 31. He said, our fathers ate the manna in the wilderness. As it is written, he gave them bread from heaven to eat. Jesus then said to them, truly, truly, I say to you, it was not Moses who gave you the bread from heaven, but my Father gives you the true bread from heaven. For the bread of God is he who comes down from heaven and gives life to the world. They said to him, sir, give us this bread always. Again, like, give us this drink of water, give us this bread. Jesus said to them, I am the bread of life. Whoever comes to me shall not hunger, and whoever shall believe in me shall never thirst. But I said to you that you have seen me, and yet you do not believe. Just think of that. We'll shall never hunger or thirst if we believe that he is the bread that sustains us, and the living water that keeps us alive, and the light of the world. I hope we get that what Jesus was trying to show them, who he was and who he is today. And yet, to some of them, they did not believe. That's what he said. You've seen me and yet do not believe. Well, we're Moses' men. If you would have believed Moses, you'd believe in me because he spoke of me. I hope today we have seen who Jesus is in your life. And maybe he has lit up your way, and you want to continue in those paths. Maybe you've struggled. Maybe you've kind of stayed still and the light went on and you stood in darkness. And there's times to change that, to keep walking in the light. God's on the move. We need to be on the move with him. If we can offer an invitation to either pray with you and for you, maybe something that's going on in your life right now. Or maybe you never obeyed the gospel and you don't want this opportunity to go unnoticed, to say everything is ready, everything is prepared for this moment, if that is your desire. If there's a need that you need to bring up at this time, if you'll come now as we stand and as we sing.